Both humans and animals have an instinctive aversion to incest. After all, reproduction is not only about passing on genes, but also about generating genetic variation within a population to better defend against parasites and pathogens. Close relatives share a high degree of genetic similarity, and forced reproduction between them often leads to severe hereditary diseases, a phenomenon known as inbreeding depression. Due to strong societal taboos against incest, direct observations of human inbreeding effects are relatively rare. However, rare does not mean non-existent. Throughout history, royalty and nobility have been a favored subject of study for geneticists because for them, incest was practically a way of life. Today, medical science has confirmed that consanguineous marriages can result in various genetic disorders. However, a look back at human history reveals that in feudal societies, where genetics was an unknown concept, such marriages were widespread among the upper class, who valued lineage and social status. This practice was common across Europe, China, Japan, and the Middle East, with cousin marriages, particularly between patrilineal or matrilineal cousins, being the most prevalent form. The most infamous dynasty for incestuous marriages in history is undoubtedly the imperial family of Japan. In ancient times, to preserve the purity of the royal bloodline, close kin marriages and incestuous relationships were extremely common within the Japanese imperial household. Cases of sexual relationships between brothers and sisters, half-siblings, mothers and sons, aunts and nephews, as well as maternal aunts and their nephews, were frequently recorded. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, cousin marriages remain a prevalent tradition even today. Statistics show that this region has the highest percentage of cousin marriages in the world. This practice is deeply rooted in Middle Eastern culture and economic structures, as traditional societies believe that cousin marriages help strengthen family ties and reinforce economic and political alliances. Despite modern medical research highlighting the genetic risks of consanguineous marriages, the tradition persists in certain regions. However, in this episode, our focus is on Europe. Let's delve into the aristocratic marriages of feudal Europe and uncover the incestuous traditions among the nobility. How exactly did European noblemen perceive close-kin marriages? Let's find out. Since the time of ancient Rome, civil law had prohibited marriages between relatives within 4 generations. Early medieval Europe continued this late Roman prohibition against close-kin marriages. Some have attributed the prevalence of cousin marriages in feudal Europe to religious influence, but if that were the case, even the popes would protest such a claim. In reality, canon law also forbade marriages between direct relatives within 4 generations. By the 9th century, the Church had extended this prohibition to 7 generations and introduced an even stricter method of calculating kinship, making marriage within 7 degrees of blood relation virtually impossible. To ensure the enforcement of these laws, canon law stipulated that if a couple unknowingly entered into a consanguineous marriage, the union could be declared null and void. In an era when divorce was exceedingly difficult, this rule became one of the few legal grounds for dissolving a marriage, highlighting how seriously the Church regarded these regulations. So, if both tradition and religion strictly forbade close-kin marriages, how did Europe eventually become a place where inbreeding and even incestuous marriages became widespread? The answer is simple: the natural course of social development. By the Middle Ages, as human society developed, labor became the most crucial resource. To sustain social growth, there was a constant need to reproduce and create a workforce. However, if the Church's strict ban on marriages within 7 generations had been rigorously enforced, the number of eligible partners would have dwindled significantly, especially among the nobility, who placed great importance on social status and class compatibility. Consider this. The nobility typically made up less than 1% of a country's total population. Within such a small pool of potential spouses, avoiding marriage within 7 degrees of kinship was nearly impossible. Ultimately, the Church's marriage laws were never effectively enforced among the aristocracy. As noble families sought to preserve their wealth and power through strategic marriages, the Church found it beneficial to turn a blind eye, allowing noble unions to proceed despite the supposed prohibitions. Well into the modern era, noble families engaging in close kin marriages were required to apply for special permission from the Church. Without this approval, their marriages risked being declared invalid. This system became a powerful tool for the Church to exert control over the aristocracy. On one hand, securing a marriage dispensation required paying a substantial fee, providing the Church with a lucrative source of income. On the other hand, by granting or withholding these permissions, the Church could manipulate the alliances of influential noble families, leveraging marriage as a means to secure political gains. In 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council reduced the number of prohibited degrees of kinship from 7 generations back to 4. However, for the nobility, even this was still too restrictive. While aristocrats could at least attempt to find suitable matches beyond 4 generations, for royal families, where the number of potential spouses could be counted on one hand, marriage without seeking church approval became nearly impossible. Much like the imperial family of Japan, European royals were obsessed with preserving the purity of their bloodline. Perhaps even more so. In European nobility, blue blood was a widely used metaphor, symbolizing the distinction between noble lineage and that of commoners. For royals, however, their blood was considered even more sacred, often referred to as divine blood. In Christian Europe, monarchs were seen as semi-divine figures, ruling by divine right as God's representatives on earth. During coronation ceremonies, a monarch would be anointed with holy oil, signifying that their soul was in communion with God. This divine status meant that their bloodline had to remain exceptionally pure. In many nations, the idea of a monarch marrying outside royal or noble circles was unacceptable. Such a union would produce offspring without true divine blood, potentially jeopardizing the stability of the state. This belief led to a tradition of intermarriage among European royal families. It became nearly impossible to find 2 ruling monarchs who, when tracing back 4 generations, did not share a common ancestor. Even in cases where 2 nations were bitter political enemies, their rulers were often close relatives by blood. Thus, royal inbreeding became a long-standing tradition in European history. The most common form of close kin marriage in Europe was cousin marriage. In genealogical terms, anyone who shares a common ancestor within 3 generations can be considered a cousin. If the relationship is between individuals of the same generation, they are first cousins. If there is a generational gap, they are second cousins. In noble and royal families, marriages between cousins were widely accepted and carried no stigma. There are countless examples of cousin marriages, some even involving double first cousins. One of the most famous cases is the marriage between King Louis XIV of France and his wife, Maria Theresa of Spain. Their union was a double first cousin marriage. Louis XIV's mother, Anne of Austria, was Maria Theresa's paternal aunt. Louis XIV's father, Louis XIII, was Maria Theresa's maternal uncle. This unusual arrangement resulted from a double marriage alliance between France and Spain, intended to end conflict between the 2 nations. Essentially, the Spanish king's 2 children married the French king's 2 children, creating 2 interwoven royal unions. Beyond cousin marriages, some royal families resorted to an even more extreme form of consanguineous marriage known as avunculate marriage, a union between a person and their parent's sibling. Even in Europe, such marriages were considered controversial and difficult for most people to accept. However, among royals, where the selection of marriage partners was severely limited, these unions occurred out of necessity to preserve bloodlines. Perhaps the most famous example of avunculate marriage occurred within the House of Habsburg, particularly in the Austrian branch, where uncle-niece marriages took place multiple times throughout history. As previously mentioned, Maria Theresa of Spain was the daughter of King Philip IV of Spain, who, after the death of his first wife, married his own niece, Mariana of Austria, despite their 30-year age gap. But the family's tangled web of marriages didn't stop there. Philip IV and Mariana's daughter later married her own uncle, Leopold I, Holy Roman Emperor. The House of Habsburg saw multiple cases of avunculate marriage. Archduke Charles II of Austria married his niece, Maria Anna of Bavaria, and shortly afterward, his brother, Ferdinand, married another niece, Anna Caterina Gonzaga. Ironically, the severe inbreeding within the royal family led to high infant mortality rates and widespread genetic deformities. Many surviving descendants displayed elongated faces, protruding jaws, and difficulty closing their lips properly. Yet, rather than recognizing these traits as signs of genetic decline, they were foolishly regarded as symbols of noble bloodline purity. The Habsburg jaw, a medical term used today to describe this extreme mandibular prognathism, was named after the House of Habsburg, whose members notoriously exhibited this distinct facial feature. However, the Habsburgs were not the originators of such incestuous marriages. The tradition had long existed in Spain and Portugal. King Afonso V of Portugal married his niece Joanna, while an even more extreme case involved Ferdinand II of Aragon, one of Spain's Catholic monarchs. His second wife, Germana of Foix, was not only his niece, but also his great-niece. Her grandmother was Ferdinand's own sister, Eleanor. Such marriages were not limited to the Iberian Peninsula. Other European royal families also engaged in similar practices. Prince Augustus Ferdinand of Prussia married his niece, Anna Elizabeth, while Duke Francis IV of Modena married his niece, Maria of Savoy. There were also cases of avunculate marriages involving same-surname relatives, where uncles married their nieces or aunts married their nephews. For example, Joanna of Naples married her great-nephew, King Ferdinand II of Naples. Similarly, Infante Antonio, son of King Charles III of Spain, married his own niece. Rather than outright ignoring generational hierarchy or intentionally engaging in incest, these marriages were often driven by political necessity. Marrying a cousin of the same generation was one thing, but marrying a close relative from a different generation was an entirely different matter. In some cases, royals did not legally marry, but still maintained long-term cohabiting relationships. For instance, King Alfonso X of Castile lived in a stable union with his own paternal aunt. In such cases, we can only speculate. Perhaps this time, it really was for love. If you thought the previous examples were shocking, then it's time to introduce one of the most extreme cases. The Targaryen-style sibling incest from Game of Thrones was not purely fictional. It actually happened in European history. The House of Armagnac was a powerful feudal dynasty in medieval France, playing a pivotal role in the Hundred Years' War, alongside families such as the Burgundians and the House of Orléans. John V, Count of Armagnac, maintained a long-term incestuous relationship with his biological sister Isabel, who was 10 years younger than him. Not only did they engage in a forbidden relationship, but they also had 3 children together. Of course, even in medieval Europe, marriages between full siblings were strictly forbidden and completely unacceptable in secular society. As a result, their 3 children were considered illegitimate. Strangely enough, none of them suffered from genetic disorders. Each grew up healthy and lived to adulthood. In conclusion, aside from the absolute prohibition of sibling marriage, European royals seem to have no other firm restrictions when it came to close kin unions. However, these inbred marriages led to the widespread transmission of genetic disorders, proving that the obsession with bloodline purity ultimately accelerated the downfall of many royal families. One of the most infamous genetic disorders caused by royal inbreeding was hemophilia, which spread across European monarchies in the 19th century. Queen Victoria of England, known as a carrier of the disease, passed it on to her numerous descendants. As a result, members of the royal families of Spain, Germany, and Russia suffered from hemophilia, leading to severe health complications and even political consequences. The House of Habsburg was another dynasty severely afflicted by inbreeding, with its consequences reaching their peak in the 17th century. This long-standing tradition of consanguineous marriages ultimately produced King Charles II of Spain, a tragic monstrosity born from generations of incest. From birth, Charles II suffered from multiple genetic disorders, intellectual disabilities, and epilepsy. His fragile constitution made his survival uncertain at any moment. The infamous Habsburg jaw was at its most extreme in him. His lower jaw was so massively deformed that he was unable to chew food properly. His tongue was so oversized that his speech was nearly incomprehensible. Charles was so physically weak that he was not weaned until the age of 5, and due to clubfoot, he only learned to walk at 10. Under normal circumstances, someone with such severe health conditions would not have survived childhood. However, as the last male heir of the Spanish Habsburg line, the royal family went to extraordinary lengths, using rare herbs and treatments to prolong his life, desperately hoping to secure the continuation of the dynasty. Despite his failing body, Charles II was forced into 2 marriages, attempting to produce an heir. However, he was born with only 1 undescended testicle, making it impossible for him to engage in normal sexual activity, let alone father children. By his 30s, Charles had become completely disabled, losing his hair, teeth, and hearing, suffering from near-total blindness, and experiencing severe epileptic seizures. One of the most bizarre incidents surrounding Charles II was his obsession with death. It is said that he once ordered the exhumation of his first wife's coffin, gazed upon her corpse with great affection, and even attempted to kiss and embrace her lifeless body. After 39 years of agony, Charles II finally succumbed to his illnesses, marking the extinction of the Spanish branch of the House of Habsburg. The high infant mortality rate among the offspring of royal inbreeding did not go unnoticed. Louis XIV of France, after the death of his beloved 5-year-old daughter, fell into a deep depression. In his grief, he summoned his royal physicians and asked, "Why is it that my illegitimate children grow up healthy, while my children with the Queen always die so young?" Given the limited medical knowledge of the time, his physicians had no answer to the Sun King's question. Louis XIV and Maria Theresa of Spain had 6 children, but only 1 son survived to adulthood, an infant mortality rate of 80%. Yet, even in the 19th century, cousin marriages remained widespread among European royals and aristocrats. It was not until the 20th century, with the advancement of Darwin's theory of evolution and genetics, that people fully understood the dangers of inbreeding. Today, most countries prohibit close kin marriages, though the legal definitions of close relatives vary between nations. While consanguineous marriages once provided short-term family stability and political continuity for royal and noble dynasties, they came at a tremendous cost: the spread of hereditary diseases and the deterioration of physical health in later generations. These intricately woven family histories serve not only as warnings from the past, but also as a profound mirror reflecting the evolution of human civilization.